2, 1, let's do this. Impy, how do you turn a Pokemon with these kinds of stats, with this frailty, with this kind of speed, into a Pokemon that can operate inside of Trick Room? Well, it's actually a little more simplistic than, some people may make it sound out. But Pheromosa can operate inside of a Trick Room. It's very, very difficult to pull off. You basically have to get all the steps properly working in order for Pheromosa to actually work inside of a Trick Room. So basically, the first thing you're going to need, in fact the major component you're going to need for a Trick Room Pheromosa to work, is the move Speed Swap. You've got to get Pheromosa to learn the move Speed Swap. If you don't have the move Speed Swap on your Pheromosa, you're basically not going to be using Trick Room Pheromosa, and it's basically not going to work at all. So, first of all, as I said in the beginning, it's very difficult to pull off. You basically need, first of all, this Pheromosa with the move Speed Swap on. Second of all, you need a Pokemon that can set up Trick Room safely. And for that, I'm going to recommend Mimikyu. Mimikyu is probably the best candidate for a Pokemon that can use Trick Room. It basically has an ability that gives it a guarantee setup at least when it hits the field. It can safely set up the Trick Room. It's not gonna, be fainted or so. It can't be faked out. It could be taunted, but if you play your cards right, they won't suspect you using the Trick Room Pheromosa simply because you have Pheromosa and it does not normally want to be inside of a Trick Room. So here's how it's gonna go. When you use the Speed Swap, what you want to do is pick an opposing Pokemon that you know 100% is going to be slower than both of your Pokemon. Whether it's gonna be, for example, a Porygon 2. If you see a Porygon 2 on the field, you know it's gonna want to set up Trick Room. Perhaps if it does try to set up the Trick Room, you let it, but in the case of Pheromosa, what you want to do is Speed Swap your speed onto the Porygon 2. So basically, Porygon 2 and Pheromosa will swap speeds. Porygon 2 will get the base 151 speed, or whatever speed your Pheromosa is sitting at, and your Pheromosa will take the 60 or so, the 60 speed of Porygon 2, effectively reversing the roles when they would normally make their move inside of a Trick Room. That is going to be the tricky part, though. If you don't get that speed off, and you don't swap the speeds out of the two Pokemon when you do set up the Trick Room, you're basically going to have a very bad day, because, as I said, Pheromosa does not normally want to work inside of a Trick Room. It wants to outspeed its opponents, it wants to get in there, it wants to KO, it wants to snowball with its ability as soon as possible. It doesn't want to sit around and wait for a Trick Room to set up, and it does not want to, speed swap its speed onto a Pokemon and not be able to take advantage of that now slower speed, allowing it to move first. So that's going to be the first way to set up the Trick Room, or set up the Speed Swap Pheromosa for the Trick Room Pheromosa. Another way you can use Pheromosa using this Speed Swap technique, especially when it comes to, setting up for Trick Room teams, because they don't suspect a Trick Room Pheromosa. They don't suspect a Pokemon who is specifically geared and capable of fighting inside of a Trick Room. And this is why it would normally catch Pokemon trainers off guard. It's because they don't suspect that something that this frail, something with these kinds of stats, would want to deliberately slow itself down and let go of something that is basically one of its calling cards. It's very high speed. It's one of the few Pokemon that can outspeed pretty much every other Pokemon that isn't running a Choice Scarf. I believe there are only 7 Pokemon, correct me if I'm wrong perhaps, but 7 Pokemon total, and these include the Megas, I believe, that can outspeed a Pheromosa naturally. I believe without Choice Scarf that number is reduced to maybe 2, but with Megas there's only like 7 or 8 or so. There are only like 7 or 8 so Pokemon, including Megas, that can outspeed a Pheromosa's naive nature max speed investment. Outside of that, Pheromosa is untouchable when it comes to the speed swap. But if you want to speed swap Pheromosa, you can do two methods. I already told you about the first one. It's the Trick Room Pheromosa. You speed swap your speed onto an opposing Pokemon that you know is going to be slower than both of yours combined, and you give them the faster speed. So it will catch them off guard. They'll be thinking, what? Why did he give me his super high speed? And then you set up the Trick Room, and then they're basically up with a Pokemon that can't really make any moves because it's so slow. And this will also give you the benefit of giving your Pheromosa a chance to use its Beast Boost for one of its offensive stats. Since its slowest stat or its highest stat will be one of its attacks, because its normally higher attack or its higher stat would be its speed, it's now one of its slower stat or lower stats. The Beast Boost will instead work on one of these attack stats. So you can go for a Naive Nature Pheromosa with a max attack investment. You'll swap the speed, and instead your highest attack or highest stat will be its attack stat. So that's one way you can work with the Pheromosa. You can go for physical Pheromosa, or you can go for a special attacking Pheromosa. I basically know that this has worked. This has worked countless times for me. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but the speed swap Pheromosa does catch my opponents off guard, and it does leave them befuddled for at least a turn or two, until they learn how to operate inside of the Trick Room. So that's one way you can use Pheromosa speed. Another way you can use Pheromosa speed is to use it to your advantage by giving Pokemon that you normally have slower stats for. Pokemon such as Dragalge or even Wishiwashi. Wishiwashi is probably one of the best examples of speed swapping your speed onto a normally slower Pokemon so that it can move faster and take advantage of its huge stat pool. So, for those who can't tell or don't really notice, Wishiwashi actually loses some speed when it goes from its solo form. It has a base speed stat total of 40, and when it goes into school form, it sacrifices just a little bit more speed in order to gain these huge attack and defensive buffs to its speeds or to its various stats. However, if you take Pheromosa's normally 151 speed and swap it over to the Wishiwashi's base speed of 30, basically you turn them around. Suddenly, whoa, look at that! You got a 252 speed Pokemon that normally would have at most let's actually put it up here at best nature, and perhaps if we're gonna go for perhaps a Jolly Nature, the best speed you can get with a Jolly Natured Wishiwashi or even something else like a Timid Nature is probably 90. But suddenly, if you remove that stat, take the stat out, and instead swap the speeds out of the two Pokemon, suddenly you have a very, very fast moving Pokemon with enormous stat potential. You basically give something that is normally super slow to compensate for the huge buffs in its stats and give it that now super high speed. You turn a very tanky Pokemon that's normally very slow into a Pokemon that's running rings around you. I don't know about you, but I don't want a school-formed Wishiwashi with 223 speed on it. I don't want to face something like that. I would already have enough difficulty with it if it wants to run against me without the speed stat, but if it's outspeeding everything I have against it, how am I supposed to power it down if it powers me down? That's basically one way you can. That's basically another way you can run the speed swaps Pheromosa. So, Pokemon that have really strong stats, for example, like say Dragalge and Wishiwashi, they compensate for having these really high stats by having very low speed stats. I mean, let's take a look at Porygon 2, for example. Just another prime example. With the Eviolite, it has it probably has one of the strongest defensive stats in all of Pokemon, simply because it can hold the Eviolite item. And to compensate for that, it has a speed stat total of 60. Imagine what would happen if you gave it that Pheromosa speed. That is the power of what Pheromosa can do. Pheromosa does not have to run the same kind of attack stats. It doesn't have to run Animate Nature or Naive Nature. It doesn't have to run offensive. It can be purely support. It can run a support role for your team. It can cause them to second guess what your strategy is with this Pheromosa. It can basically do a whole lot if you give Pheromosa the tools necessary for it to run run into a Trick Room team. If you know your opponent is going to be running a Trick Room, well, you bring the Speed Swaps Pheromosa. Trick them up. Make them play, play their game, but make them play the game you want to play it by their rules. So if you want to play with if they want to play Trick Room, tell them, all right, fine, we'll play Trick Room, but you're gonna take my 151 base speed, and I will take your slower speed, and I will move first regardless of how fast or how slow you want to be. And if they try to, take back their Trick Room, tries to reverse Trick Room, well, you play the speed swap again. Give your partner Pokemon the slower speed, and you get a higher speed. They trade their speeds, they go back into Trick Room, they try to take Trick Room out. Pheromosa can run in both if she gets the tools and the time to use those tools. So that is basically one way, and actually two ways I mentioned, for how you can use Pheromosa inside and outside of Trick Room. But once again, you need the speed swap. Without the speed swap, you cannot use your Trick Room Pheromosa properly. So I hope you guys take this into considerations when you form your own teams. Just remember, Pheromosa has more tricks to run than just speeds or just high jump kicks, bug buzzes, lunges, or even other moves such as Quick Guard. Perhaps even Quick Guard is not a move you could run, but it can do other things besides just aggro aggression. It can run strange support roles. It can even trip up your opponents simply by using the speed swap. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you tacticians next time for more crazy strategies. I am Impy, your Fedora Ram. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.
I'm taking in what I can get, but I can't find the answers yet. Head underwater, slow my mind. I hold my breath until I'm fine.